about to hear spine-tingling tales of the paranormal, bizarre coincidence, and unexplained phenomena. This is Strange Podcast. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and at strangepodcast.com.
This is episode 10. I'm Chris Batchelor. Thank you for listening. For 20 years, a mysterious handprint was visible on a Chicago fire station window. It could not be cleaned off, buffed off, or even scraped off. Many believe the handprint belonged to Francis Leavy, a firefighter who was cleaning the window when he predicted his own death in 1924. Was this handprint all that remained of a tragic premonition? In this episode, we'll explore this strange tale of bizarre foreboding and reveal other shocking stories of forewarning. Once again, a very warm welcome to Strange Podcast episode 10. We've made it into double figures. As ever, thank you for listening. Thanks for finding us on Facebook, on Twitter, and at strangepodcast.com. And this time, a very special thank you to Lee, who's become our first ever Patreon supporter. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a crowdfunding website that enables creative projects like this one, like Strange Podcast, to be able to receive funds from their listeners to help pay for the fees associated with producing the podcast. If you'd like to find out a bit more about that, if you're feeling generous, please head over to our website, strangepodcast.com. If you look out for a support on Patreon button, you click on that one and that will take you through to all the information that you need to know. And thanks as ever for your support. And whilst we're doing some thank yous, we've been mentioned on another spooky podcast, so we thought we'd return the favour. Noisy Spirit have suggested to their listeners that we're a good podcast to listen to, so we'd like to return the favour and say if you like ghost stories, definitely check out Noisy Spirit at noisyspirit.com. It's always interesting to take a look at what spooky and strange stories have been making the headlines over recent weeks. Lots of ghost photos have been appearing in the paranormal press. There's two that have caught our eye. We've stuck them up on our episode page at strangepodcast.com/episode 10. The first of which is from a paranormal investigation group called Haunted Happenings. They're based here in the UK. And whilst investigating what they claim to be is a haunted hospital at Newsham Park in Liverpool, it's no longer a hospital, it's now decommissioned. They've taken a group photo of all their members attending that investigation on that particular evening. And then some days later, discovered there's an extra member standing with them. It appears to be an apparition of a woman who they claim wasn't there on the night. It's quite a clear photo, really quite spooky, well worth looking at. And if you look very closely, just below the apparition, there seems to be a second face of what you could suggest is a small boy peeking out from behind one of the members' shoulders, if you like, sort of peeking out at the camera. It's well worth looking at, so if you pop along to our website, you'll see that. You'll also see the spooky backseat driver. The girl has taken a picture of herself. It's a selfie. This is in Florida, and in the backseat of the car, behind her, is a young boy. They claim that there was nobody in the backseat of the car, and the young boy is a ghost that had a message for them. You can read that full story and view that photo at strangepodcast.com/episode 10. And don't forget to keep in touch. We love hearing from you. We love hearing what you think about Strange Podcast, your ideas of how we can grow and improve the show. We also would love to hear your strange stories. If you've ever been involved with anything that you can't explain, we'd love to hear from you. And that's exactly what one of our listeners in Warwickshire has done. They've decided to remain nameless. However, what you're about to hear is their email of their spooky story, which happened to them one evening. I used to work in a country house in rural Warwickshire, which is some 375 plus years old. Also, it's important that you know the household was a Catholic household and had a family connection to the gunpowder plot. At the time of my encounter, I was then responsible for the opening and closing of the house. The night was about early November, near to the 5th, and took place about 1 in the morning. I should also say that I'm sensitive to paranormal happenings. After a business dinner, I was responsible for closing the house from top to bottom. I started up on the roof of the main gatehouse, and I must say from the off, I was aware of someone who I could not see or hear, invisibly watching my every move, with both intense hostility and the feeling of hatred aimed directly at me. I should also say that I was completely alone in this side of the house where I was working. Now, after closing the roof door behind me, I ran down the spiral stairs to the tower room to cover the display cases and close the blinds. Again, all I was aware of was a feeling of someone watching me with intense hatred and hostility towards me. I then closed the tower door behind me and ran down the remaining spiral stairs to the drawing rooms, again covering the display cases, closing the blinds, all the while with the intense feeling of hatred and hostility aimed towards me. After closing the 2 rooms, I had to pass the entryway to the tower, and it was as if who or what was watching me was just out of sight, and all the time following me. Then I quickly walked down the main stairs to the dining room. Here a 40-piece silver dining service was laid out on the dining room table, waiting for me to put it away. I closed the blinds and started to put the silver dining service away in the safe. Every time I went from the dining room to the safe with the silver plates, I was aware of something or someone standing on the second landing, watching me, all the time, out the corner of my eye. I was aware of something just watching me with intense hostility and hatred towards me. I finished and closed and locked the safe. I closed the dining room door, only this time the door closed with a slam, almost as if it was pulled from my hand. I then went down the length of the dining room and walked up 3 steps to the tapestry rooms to cover cases, close blinds, and switch off lights. And it was always with, by now, a very intense feeling of hatred towards me. And then down 3 steps, passing a dead-end entry, then closed the bottom doors to the dining room and walked into the tribune room. In the top corner of this room was a small removed piece of wooden panelling to enable someone to look for Protestant soldiers, and although I couldn't see anyone, I was always aware of someone or something watching me with that same intense feeling of hatred and hostility towards me. Every time I turned away from the peephole, I just felt someone or something was there, watching me. Once I left the tribune room and closed the double doors behind me, again I must stress that there was nobody else but me on the south side of the house, so nobody was playing tricks on me. I switched off the chandeliers in the last saloon room, but for the last one, which I left on so I could see when covering the cases and drawing close the blinds. Yet I was very much aware of this person or thing standing on the top of the landing of the double stairs overlooking the saloon, and always watching me with a very intense feeling of hatred and hostility aimed right at me. And by 2:30 a.m. in the morning, I didn't mind admitting I was a little scared. In fact, scared rigid. And I had a feeling that if I went back to check, that something awful might happen to me. Finally, I exited the saloon and shut the doors behind me, having switched off the final chandelier and feeling that someone or something was still following me. So you can guess by this time I was pretty much thoroughly frightened and just wanted to leave, which I did about 10 minutes later. Just after I'd shut the exit doors behind me, I heard one almighty loud bang, as if a picture or something had fallen down. And I had in my head a little voice warning me to get out and under no circumstances go back to find out what had happened, and that if I did, I'd be harmed. So I did exactly that, and I went and drove home at speed, as if all the devils in hell were after me, and you may be sure that I locked my car doors once I was in my car. Anyhow, the next day at 8 a.m, I went back into work,
and I went upstairs to where I'd reckoned the massive bang had come from, to find out what had fallen over to cause such a loud noise. However, I could not find anything. There was nothing that might have fallen down, and all the pictures, furniture, everything was all in place. Shortly thereafter, I stopped working at the property and never returned. There is a final piece to my story. In 2001, I returned out of sheer curiosity to the property where my story took place, and just after I entered into the main house, that feeling of intense hatred and hostility returned. Up to now, I've never mentioned this to anyone, and despite investigating, I've never found an explanation as to what happened to me. The only clue I can give you is this. The house where I worked was strongly involved in both the gunpowder plot as well as the English Civil War. So maybe the echoes of pain and agony of long past were seeping through. I hope you find my story interesting.
We absolutely loved receiving that email. Thank you very much for that. If you've got a strange story you'd like to share, you can pop along to the contact page at strangepodcast.com, or you can email me directly, chris@strangepodcast.com, and it could be your strange story being read out on a future episode. Now it's time to have a look at the main feature of this episode, where we explore the very strange phenomena that is premonition. If you Google the word premonition, if you can spell it of course, it took me a few attempts, Google will tell you it means to have a strong feeling about something that is about to happen, especially something unpleasant. One of the most famous examples of a tragic premonition has to be that of firefighter Francis Leavy. Francis Leavy was a dedicated firefighter during the 1920s in the city of Chicago. He loved his job and his teammates loved him. People say he was a pleasant man, always ready with a smile and a helping hand. However, on April the 18th, 1924, all of that was to change. The story goes that Francis was carrying out his daily duties in the fire station. He was cleaning a large window. His demeanor was very different, very unusual. He seemed troubled and certainly not himself. It's said that Leavy suddenly announced to his teammates he had a bizarre and strange feeling. A feeling that he might die that very day. With that strange statement, the phone rang. There was a raging building fire some distance from the station. Leavy and his team quickly leaped into action, thoughts now focused on attending the emergency. In just a few minutes, Francis Leavy and his fellow firefighters were on the scene, assessing the situation and helping those trapped on the top floors. Everything seemed to be on track to rescue everyone from the building. Then suddenly the flames engulfed the lower part of the building and the roof caved in. As soon as this happened, the walls came crashing down, pinning many people under the rubble, including Francis Leavy. Leavy's grim premonition came true. He lost his life that very day. The next day, trying to come to terms with the loss of their colleague, Leavy's teammates sat at the firehouse thinking about the events of the previous day. Suddenly, they noticed something strange on the windows. It looked like a handprint, smudged onto the glass. Eerily, it was the very same window that Francis Leavy was busy washing the day before. The fireman cleaned the window, but the handprint stubbornly refused to disappear. In fact, the print remained for many years, in spite of some chemicals used to try and remove it. It's said that this strange mystery remained unsolved, but came to an abrupt end
when a newspaper boy threw a paper against the window in 1944, causing it to shatter into pieces. There have been many other famous examples of premonitions coming true. For 10 nights in a row in 1970, David Booth had the same nightmare. While deep in sleep, he witnessed a jetliner veering off a runway, flipping completely over, and then bursting into flames. Booth was compelled to inform the FAA about his dream. Officials actually listened to what he had to say and concluded that he was dreaming of a Boeing 727 or perhaps a DC-10 plane. On the day that David Booth had his last nightmare, American Airlines DC-10 flight 191 crashed just a few moments after takeoff. One of the plane's engines broke loose, causing an imbalance. The plane flipped on the runway and burst into flames. Sadly, all 273 passengers on board died. Jeremy Driscoll, a Benedictine monk living in Oregon, was listening to a report on the dangers of hurricanes in Louisiana when he suddenly had a vision. He saw the Gulf from a northern direction and could make out the state of Louisiana in the distance. The land seemed weak, unprepared for any disaster. A hurricane then rolled in and destroyed the state, and yet no one was killed because the area was deserted. Father Jeremy didn't know if he had seen a vision of the past or a vision of the future until Hurricane Katrina slammed into New Orleans in August 2005. Jeremy's vision was to be included in his book called The Monk's Alphabet. However, the editors chose to omit it, as they felt people would never believe it. Carl Jung's studies into psychoanalysis involved interpreting others' dreams, but in 1914, he had some significant dreams of his own. He saw the whole sea turn to blood, with multitudes of bodies drowning in yellow waves. Then he saw a cold wave freeze an entire country, killing everybody. Jung saw this as a premonition of war, and he thought further dreams of floods, water stretching from the Alps to the North Sea, represented the horrible trenches that soldiers were forced to endure. He experienced his last dream in June 1914. Just over 1 month later, on August the 1st, World War I began. It appears that premonition may actually exist. A premonition may be a way of predicting the future. You may have even had your own experience. However, to prove it to be true, that premonition does exist is a very difficult task. You can only confirm that you've had a premonition after the event. And there will always be a school of thought that will say your premonition is just a coincidence, no matter how bizarre and no matter how extraordinary.
So, what do you think? Leave your thoughts and comments at strangepodcast.com. For more strange stories, find us on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, thank you for listening.